Welcome, Tracy. And as we're getting these poll results in, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Thanks, Krista and David. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a client we had that was a large leisure cruise line and a process by which they went through to modernize their reservation platform. So this particular cruise line has 33 different ships. They run itineraries ranging in length from, on the small end, 3 days. They do have some sailings that go a full year, 360 days. The ships sail, the 33 ships sail under 3 separate brands. These brands were acquired through a series of mergers. The last one was completed about 5 years ago. And like often happens in mergers, they left the company with lots of different systems. In this case, 3 different go-to-market strategies supported by 3 different platforms. 2 platforms were their what they call land-based systems that they use to sell reservations to people before embarking on a cruise, and then a third system that was shared by all 3 companies. That was used to sell things once guests were on board. This could be future cruises, this could be shore excursions. If you've ever taken a cruise, you know that there's a lot of selling that happens once a voyage departs. But what they had, because of these 3 different systems, there was a challenge sharing systems or information across the systems, especially between the 2 land-based systems and the onboard system. But there were also problems sharing customer data between the systems as well. Each of the 3 systems was a monolith. Aaron just talked a lot about monoliths and some of the problems you get with monoliths. They had heavy client UIs communicating with back-end servers. And all 3 systems were vendor locked. And the problem in this case with the vendor locked systems is that sometimes the company was forced to adjust their business operations to the way their systems worked. And this is just because in the short term, it was too difficult to adjust the software to their business. Often, all 3 of their vendors were happy to accept feature requests for changes in the way that the business wanted to operate their business, but in some of the cases, it was a very long timeline to get those features. In fact, one of their vendors had a backlog of 2 years worth of features that they'd requested, and that's how long it was going to take to get all the features they needed. And in this industry and many others, by the time they get those features, they're probably going to be doing something different anyway. Just not flexible enough to respond to the changes that they were making. So the IT organization took a look at what else was available in the market as they wanted to consolidate these 3 systems into one, as well as have a flexible system, and there just wasn't anything. So they decided to build a custom solution. So they started with a very small team, sort of a hotshot team that was just trying to decide what is the feasibility of producing a system. They're looking at meeting these goals. The first thing, and probably the thing that we heard over and over again as we worked with them, is they wanted a world-class user experience for every single person that interacted with this system. These are internal users that manage pricing and inventory for their system, the call center agents that book for people, travel agency partners, and for the guests who were able to self-serve through their web platform. They wanted a consistent experience across all those different channels. And they wanted the same experience for people who were using the land-based version as well as the ship-based version of their reservation platform. They needed a system that was flexible enough to quickly react to changes in the company's business model and selling strategy. They wanted to reduce customer reliance on call centers, allow them to manage their own vacations, and they wanted to improve visibility to customer spend while the customers were on board the ships, whether that be customers that buy jewelry, art, spend in casinos, souvenirs. They wanted to understand which customers were doing what on board the ship, and they just didn't have that visibility. So the first thing they did was just they decided to pick platforms. They engaged BP3 early on. They realized that their solution was going to have some process and AI components. They found BP3 and asked us to help them with a software selection. Of chief concern for their entire platform was they wanted to go open source as much as possible. They really, really didn't like the vendor lock that they were trapped within, and they wanted to use open source tools. They'd settled before they brought us in on building microservices written in Scala, deployable to multiple cloud environments. Remember, we have they have data centers on their ships as well as data centers spread throughout the US. And they wanted whatever process and decision automation platform they chose to run in a JVM, because Scala runs in a JVM. They wanted open source, but they wanted good vendor support behind that open source, and they wanted products that were able to respond quickly to their changes in their business model. Given these criteria, we quickly narrowed the field to a few different open source platforms and settled on Red Hat's Process Automation Manager. Process Automation Manager has a widely used process engine. It has a really good rules-based inferencing platform. And at the time, and I think still today, it was the only open source product that had a level 3 compliant DMN engine and DMN modeler. The company was already a Red Hat customer. They had existing support for other tools, including OpenShift, which is Red Hat's supported version of Kubernetes, which they had chosen as a deployment environment. So for a lot of reasons, it made sense to use PAM. Once we selected a product, they decided, and this is common, to carve out a piece of functionality which would exercise various pieces of the platform they'd chosen and build a proof of concept. So we were engaged for 3 months to help with that effort, and we worked in tandem with their IT development organization, and we focused really on 2 pieces of that POC, while their IT organization did a few other things. So I'll focus on the things that we did with them. First thing we did was we went in right at the beginning of this POC and led a design sprint. Now, if you're not familiar with what a design sprint is, what we at BP3 do is we come in and we do a 1-week workshop, and we frame system requirements and user interactions. We usually produce a prototype out of that gets tested with users. In this case, we produce high fidelity UI designs out of this, which then this organization's IT department built. But really out of this workshop, what you get is a clear definition of what you're going for. In this case, we chose to focus on the interactions that pricing analysts have with the system. Where pricing analysts manage cruise pricing and they manage inventory, and their goal is to maximize revenue for the company. So we did the design sprint. We produced a set of user stories. We produced a set of designs, and we sort of narrowed the scope of the POC into something that was consumable. And then we also built, on the PAM stack, we built a cruise pricing engine. Now, that was using the rule-based inferencing engine, the Drools platform within PAM. And this particular engine was combining information about a particular guest, their cabin selection on a particular cruise, along with what amenities, excursions, and transfers they wanted to package together, applying the appropriate discounts, and computed a price that was unique to that guest. This was part of the decision architecture that we were going for. So in just a few months, with their IT department, we built a working proof of concept, and it really is what sold the project to the C-suite. They were able to get about a $20 million budget, and then we immediately wanted to get going and build a product. So out of that POC, we had settled on an approach to requirements analysis and design, and we also made some broad architecture decision. So remember that we had a goal that we have a world-class user experience for all stakeholders. And what UX-focused design did for this is it really, at least at the POC, enabled to capture requirements in such a way that the system could be built around this tenet of world-class user design. Design sprints and other UX-focused workshop enabled us to build user personas, define business goals, produce UI mockups, and otherwise frame the features of the new system in a way that articulated value to one or more of the stakeholders. These workshops are also effective at breaking the system into parts that can be articulated and understood by business stakeholders and developers alike. It's actually a really great way to do requirement analysis, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the POC also allowed us to demonstrate capability to build a microservices-based event source system that could be replicated across their 3 land-based data centers and the 33 moving data centers that were scattered across the 7 seas. 1 data center on each ship. Now, I haven't talked about this up till now, but a unique challenge of this project was our system needed to be replicated across these ships. And as a ship is sailing, it often gets into places where it gets out of contact with the rest of the world. And that unreliable connectivity can create problems. So because we were on an asynchronous message-based platform for an architecture, the advantage there is that messages can be replicated to all these data centers. But if a data center is uncontactable, is that a word, uncontactable? I'm not sure. But if you can't get to one, you can queue those messages up, and as soon as they get back online, you know, if they're sailing around Antarctica or something like that, you can begin to push messages to them. They can process them, and they can then get back in sync with the rest of the world. This eventual consistency is really important in a system like this, where you have so much replication that needs to happen and somewhat unreliable communication. So we had a POC, we'd sold our project to the executive team, and what's next? The director's been given this giant budget. He's about to begin the most ambitious project he's ever run, and his development organization has never done anything at this scale. But he's under pressure to show progress early. He decided a good place to start would be to take that POC and actually get it into production. He already had something that looked like it worked. But as you know, as most of you know, POCs aren't really production code. We do a lot of things. We take shortcuts sometimes. In this case, the whole thing ran on a laptop. It wasn't in the cloud. It wasn't hooked up to a back-end system of record. Now, in order to get this POC into production, we had to hook that that up to the legacy systems database. And again, we have an event-based, event-sourced architecture instead of a traditional relational database architecture. It ended up being a really big lift, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit, but there were lots of challenges around that, which we'll cover in a minute. As really the IT organization was working on that, BP3 came in and worked in 3 different areas. We worked in AI, we worked in process discovery, and we worked in requirements discovery with our design team. And really, in the AI space, we made improvements to the pricing engine that we had built as part of the POC, adding extra functionality that we had excluded. These extra functionality were really around promotions and discounts. We also undertook the creation of a second decision service, which was cabin availability. In order to sell reservations, you need to know the price, but you also need to know what's available on a ship for a particular itinerary. So we had these engines. We need to figure out how to integrate them well into the rest of the system. So we worked with architecture on patterns around deploying these decision services as microservices within their architecture. We built patterns for APIs and also for testing these both in isolation and within the system. So while we were doing that, we had other people working on process discovery. We helped with their air and ground transportation systems. When you buy a cruise, if you've never done it, you often will bundle a flight to and from your embarkation port. This is a third-party provider that provides that. You may pay the cruise line, but it might be United or Delta or Southwest who actually provides that air transportation. Likewise, ground transfers from the airport to the cruise port. They have processes around how they make flights and ground transportation available. So we did some process discovery around that, as well as general exception management when things go wrong for the pricing analysts. Now, we did process discovery. We slated the actual implementation of those processes for a second release. And again, this is, you heard Reiner talk a little bit about it. You heard Aaron talk about iterative work and subsequent releases. We did the process discovery as part of this first release, slotting the implementation of those processes for later. The last thing we did is we came in and we participated in their requirements discovery process. Now at the POC, we used a design sprint to frame those requirements for the POC. And this organization liked what we did, and they invited us to be part of their product owner's process or requirements discovery for the system. But they really wanted their product owners to drive that process. In this case, their product owners were brand new people, not quite ready to do requirements discovery, and they kind of stumbled out of the gate a bit. They didn't ask us to lead that effort initially, and they did have a few issues. Took a little bit of time to recover. They asked us to come in and help drive. Our design team did an excellent job of kind of taking that ball and running and beginning to mentor them in the art of requirements discovery through design thinking. It did get better. It just took a little while. So I kind of mentioned some of the challenges, but again, we had a big budget. It was a big project. I don't know how many of you listening have run projects this big. $20 million always seems like a lot of money, but if you're not careful, you can quickly spend that money without getting anything to show for it. So let's just talk about some of the challenges you might run into on a project this big. These were challenges that we actually faced. We were able to get through everything that I'm going to show you on this list. Some of them were bigger than others, but let's just look. So the first thing you'll see is on the top of this list, the organization we were working with here, every time they'd ever undertaken a project, they used sort of a waterfall approach. This was the first project that they tried to do using agile methods. They were just inexperienced. Took this company about 6 months to really hit a groove where they could start to achieve the goals that they set for themselves in sprints. And frankly, I've seen this a few times. This was not the first time I've seen an organization moving to Agile and not getting it right away. So really a good solution if you're new to Agile is keep your development team small. You might have a $20 million budget, all right? You might be looking, this is a 1 to 2 year project and I need 40 people on 4 different teams to deliver this. Don't go hire 40 people or don't put 40 people on the project. Keep your team small, give them measurable, achievable goals, and wait till they start achieving those goals before you scale. That's really a good solution to that issue. Here we were dealing with lots of new technology. I don't know how many of you have used event-sourced architecture. It's fairly new. It's been around a little while. Deployment in Kubernetes has been around a few years, but what I'm seeing is enterprises only in the last 1 or 2 years are actually starting to use Kubernetes for deployment. Dealing with new technology always presents risk and challenge. My solution to this is don't bite off a ton. This is kind of like the last point. Start small, pick something small. Even the POC that we picked to put into production was probably a little bit too big in as a single one release. Because of these 2 challenges, things got delayed. Business stakeholders started to become impatient. We saw, promises were made. In a month we're going to have something. In a month became 6 weeks, became 2 months, became 3 months. With progress was being made, it just was being made behind the scenes, and in this case, the development team had overpromised. So as business stakeholders became impatient, started to lose a little confidence, we kind of had to reset. We went back and we went back to our design thinking, our UX goals, and we started to deliver really front-end UIs that were built on the back-end system. It's amazing how much buy-in you can get from business by giving business something that they can touch and feel and play with. Even if all you've done is put a new skin on an old goat, you still have something that excites users. Once you start to do that, you can sort of swap out the back end and just give a little bit of candy with each release that is really the big back end stuff that you're swapping out. The last thing that we saw was that testing was a big beast on this system. Now, Aaron kind of walked you through what it looks like to build a microservices-based solution. Microservices are great. I love them for all the reasons that Aaron mentioned. But one of the things that can happen, especially, you have to take a little bit extra debt right at the front end, because all these disparate systems that act as black boxes have to integrate to each other. That initial integration can be challenging. So get QA involved early in your testing plan. Don't confuse QA with user acceptance. At this place, we had our user group, our their QA plan was just have the users do the QA. That doesn't work. Get a good testing strategy. Let's review really quickly our project goals, and I see I'm already 5 minutes over. I see Krista kind of smiling like, is it going to get done? And now I'm taking a long time talking about that.
I don't know why you're saying that would be me smiling like that. David was smiling like that.
Overview of our goals. Again, how do we do? This is where I remind you about COVID. We're getting ready to drop a release early in 2020, and as you may remember, the cruise line was one of the first industries to really get hit. Right now, in America at least, cruises are still not sailing. None of them are. In the near term, it looks like they may start shortly. And we know when they do, customers are going to return. People love their cruises. I know lots of people that do these things more than once a year. But right now, there's a lot of risk associated with that activity. When they begin sailing, we know the market's going to be different. We're not sure how, but we do think that this system that we've built will help this particular cruise line to compete well. And we really are looking forward to seeing how it works once they get to start using it. So that's it from me. Krista or David, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. Really appreciate it. We are running a couple minutes over. Apologize for that, but I want to thank all of the panelists that we've had today. I really enjoy hearing about actual projects that we've delivered, and so that's how we've kind of tried to structure today. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I guess one thing to kind of wrap things up, I do want to know that application modernization, it's just one of the ways that BP3 thinks about the work that the software engineering team does. So we're also building new modern applications from scratch. And we think of that as full stack development, and we're always bringing a process lens with it. So, you know, whether you have a legacy application or a process that needs updating or something brand new, BP3 is here to help.